Yeah. Okay, so welcome to the talk part of the evening. Hope you're enjoying yourself so far and having a nice evening. Yeah, nodding August, nodding. Yeah. Okay, so the talk is called With Mindfulness Strive On. With Mindfulness Strive On. So these were, with Mindfulness Strive On, these were the last words of the Buddha. So they were the Buddha's last final words before his physical death, before his parinirvana. So just a little kind of orient us in where we are in the theme. Our current theme is called the Beating Heart of Buddhism. And we're looking at the Bodhisattva ideal. So the Bodhisattva ideal, which is the path of practice of attaining enlightenment, not just for oneself, but for the benefit of all beings whatsoever. So in this theme, we're looking at this path of practice of the aspiring Bodhisattva. And we're looking particularly at the practice of the 6 perfections, or Paranitas, as they're called. So last week we looked at the first paramita, generosity or dana, and tonight we're looking at the second paramita, which is ethics or shila as it's sometimes called. So ethics this evening. So I'll just start with a little bit of a recap. So what is a bodhisattva and what is the bodhisattva ideal? Okay, so a bodhisattva practices not just for themselves, but for all beings, okay? And well, we do as well, don't we? We too all want to be happy, and we all want to be free from suffering, and we all want all beings and the world to be free from suffering as well. We all do want that. And the way we try to do that is we try to kind of get all our ducks in a row, don't we? We try to change what we can in the world, and we try to change what we can in ourselves. We try to improve things, we try to change things, and we really try to get things how we want them to be and how we think they should be, to get them such that there is less suffering, so that we can end suffering. And we want to do that. And of course, on its own terms, on its own level, there's nothing at all wrong with that. It's completely necessary, totally helpful, and this is really necessary in the world. But the Bodhisattva has gone beyond that in a very different way. So a Bodhisattva has seen that in worldly terms, however crucial all that actually is, it is limited. It can't work as an ultimate solution. We just can't get everything how it needs to be permanently so that there is never any suffering. We just can't do it. Things keep changing. Everything keeps changing. And we've always still got the problem of the human mind and the craving and the aversion and the delusion in the human mind that drives suffering. So this is the very basic truth of dukkha taught by the Buddha, the truth of suffering, dukkha. So the Bodhisattva has deeply realized that the solution to suffering is a radical solution, and it's a spiritual solution rather than just a purely worldly solution. And the Bodhisattva has seen through this painful delusion of the fixed separate things and fixed separate self. So it's like a complete turning about, a complete turning around in a Bodhisattva's consciousness. It's a relaxing and a letting go of any self-referencing. And the Bodhisattva has seen the reality of absolute interconnectedness, the truth of shunyata, as it's called. Okay? So that's the Bodhisattva's perspective. And from that perspective, there's no possibility of suffering. Their mode of being has gone beyond that self. And it's said that a bodhisattva dwells in perfection, absolute perfection and bliss. And then what follows from that is total compassion for all beings who are still trapped in this delusion and trapped in suffering. And then a natural drive and activity to help all beings find their way out So that's the perspective of a bodhisattva, and it results in natural, skillful action without anxiety or fear or overwhelm. It's called the play of the bodhisattva. It's a natural, skillful play of the bodhisattva. And this realization, this absolute compassion, is what's behind the text that we're looking at in the theme. So we're looking at a text by Shantideva, and it's this outpouring of compassion, this discourse that we call the Bodhicharyavatara. I've written that down. So Shantideva, and that's the name of the text, the Bodhicharyavatara. The way of the Bodhisattva. So this is the text that we're looking at in this theme. And it's quite a challenging and quite a radical text if you take it the wrong way. But seen from the right perspective, it's a sublime and poetic text. Okay, so Shantideva says about this shift in perspective of how to end suffering in the world. Shantideva says, when we tame our mind, we tame all threats and problems, because all suffering and fear comes from the mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. We can't cover the whole world in leather, but if we put leather on the soles of our feet, it has the same effect. So that's a flavour of this kind of really different perspective. Okay, so how do we do it? How do we practice to become more like a bodhisattva? So the practices on the bodhisattva path are called the paramitas, ways to go beyond this limited self. So the bodhisattva path is practicing to move our perspective from just ourselves to all beings. And it's a beautiful and sublime ideal. It's the very highest of human ideals. And it can seem very lofty. The things I've just been saying about the bodhisattva and the bodhisattva ideal can seem really lofty. But these practices, the practices of the 6 paramitas, they're also completely down to earth and completely practical for us on our level as an everyday practice. So we've got a list. Here's our list. These are the paramitas, the 6 perfections, the 6 paramitas, ways to go beyond. So we've got generosity or giving, called dana. We've got ethics, also called shila. We've got forbearance or patience, called kshanti. We've got energy or virya, and we've got meditation, and we've got wisdom. So that's our list. That's the 6 paramitas, the practices of a bodhisattva. And so in their depths, they're an expression of a profound level of understanding of reality itself. So to be able to act in line with these paramitas at all times, that would be enlightenment itself. But the great thing, as I've just said, is that this approach to practicing the paramitas, we can start where we are, on our own level, where we are, and we can practice these. They're relevant and accessible to us in our lives today, as we are. Okay, so tonight's talk is about mindfulness, with mindfulness strive on, and it's not on that list, is it? It's not on the list of paramitas. But don't worry, I'm not just like doing whatever, going off the program, doing my thing. Where we actually are is here. So we're going to be talking about ethics, or Shila ethics tonight. And as we said, the series is based on the text called the Bodhicharyavatara by Shantideva. And in that text, Shantideva focuses on mindfulness for the perfection of ethics. So when he's talking about ethics, he's focusing on mindfulness. Because mindfulness is the fundamental basis of an ethical life. We can probably recall the 5 ethical precepts that we came up with on the intro course. So we've got kindness, generosity, contentment, honesty, and mindfulness, the 5 precepts. And without mindfulness, we can't practice any of the other precepts. We can't live an ethical life unless we're mindful of what we're doing. So again, Shantideva says, a quote from the texts, Shantideva's texts, if we don't keep our mindfulness, what will happen to all our other vows and precepts? Just as a sick man isn't fit for any work, so a distracted mind can't do anything useful. It is like a leaky jug. Nothing that is heard, reflected upon, or developed in meditation stays in it. Okay, so we'll be focusing on mindfulness this evening. So I'll just look a little bit more detail at what mindfulness really is. What is mindfulness? So I've got another flip chart, bit of a list. So mindfulness, we can look at mindfulness as having three main aspects to mindfulness, so three different aspects. So we've got sati or smriti, which is present moment awareness. We've got sampajanya or samprajanya, which is mindfulness of purpose. And we've got appamada or apramada, ethical vigilance. Okay, three different sort of aspects to what mindfulness is. So these terms are in both in Pali and Sanskrit, and I don't know which is which. And I think they're used fairly interchangeably. I think we just say whichever's easiest. So I'm not going to be saying smriti, I'll say sati. And I think we do tend to use them interchangeably. And yeah, I don't think it really matters, as long as we know what we're talking about. Okay, so I'll describe each of these. There's quite a lot of information on there, but I'll describe what each of these aspects is. And I think you'll recognize it in your own experience. I think you'll know what this feels like. Okay, so firstly, sati. So this is maybe what we think of as mindfulness in a kind of everyday sense. Okay, so sati, present moment awareness. So this is being present, focused, and aware. So we're mindful of our direct, present experience, being in the moment, as we sometimes say. That's what sati is. So sati, it actually translates as recollection or even memory. So what that is it's remembering to be aware. It's recollecting or recollecting awareness, bringing that back. So it's that moment when you go, oh, what have I been doing? How did I get here? I don't really remember driving, or I don't remember the route I've been on until just now. That moment, that's sati. We're recollecting, we're recollecting awareness, remembering, gathering awareness. That's sati. So Sangha, the founder of Triratna movement, he says about sati, he says, we can take delight in that calm state and really enjoy it. Everything we do in that state is mindful, imbued with mind, permeating it wholly. It saturates the whole of what you do and is indistinguishable from it. So it's quite a full state of awareness. So we can see from those descriptions that it's the opposite of being fragmented or distracted or absent-minded. Okay, so that's sati, that's the first aspect. But that's just one aspect of what mindfulness is. So the next aspect of mindfulness is sampajanya. And that can be translated as clear knowing. Sampajanya, clear knowing. It means knowing your purpose or knowing your goal. So Sangha describes this as mindfulness of purpose. So it's knowing how what you're doing now is related to your purpose, whether what you're actually doing is going to help you achieve your goals. And so this type of mindfulness, it's the opposite of just sort of drifting along. aimlessly just kind of going with the flow. You don't really know where you're going or why you're doing it. It's a real mindfulness of purpose. You know your goal and you know whether what you're doing is helping you achieve your goal. So that's mindfulness of purpose, sampajanya. And then the third aspect of mindfulness is appamada. And this sometimes translates as vigilance or heedfulness. Appamada, heedfulness. So this is mindfulness that in an actively ethical sense. So it's being aware of the ethical implications of our actions. So it's a heedfulness, it's mindfully guarding against unskillfulness in body, speech and mind, keeping vigilance over that and keeping that in mind. So appamada is being mindful of our ethical intentions and commitments, being mindful of our intention to act skillfully. So it's the opposite of carelessness and it's the opposite of intoxication. So that's appamada, ethical vigilance. And it's interesting to note that in the Buddha's last words, with mindfulness strive on, the word translated as mindfulness there is appamada. So the Buddha was saying, the Buddha's final last words were, with ethical vigilance strive on. So that's got a much stronger emphasis on compassion and care for others and the world than just be aware. So with ethical vigilance, strive on. So these are the three aspects of mindfulness. Broadly to remember them, we could look at this in terms of like past, present and future. It's quite a good way of kind of remembering this stuff. So we could say sati is present moment awareness. Sampajanya is mindfulness of the future, mindfulness of future goals, and appamada is mindfulness of our past ethical resolutions. So that's just like a little bit of a quick way of remembering those three aspects. So why do we need all that, information? Why do we need to distinguish between these three aspects? Why can't we just pay attention and be focused? Well, this is what makes mindfulness a particularly spiritual practice, rather than mindfulness limited to being a psychological or emotional well-being tool. And again, there's nothing at all wrong with that, of course. It's completely necessary, very important stuff. But a bodhisattva, a trainee bodhisattva, goes beyond that. So a trainee bodhisattva, and maybe that's us, maybe it is us, aims to be aware of how they're affecting others through their ethics, and also keeps moving towards their purpose of the ultimate goal of enlightenment. So we're keeping that in mind, we're keeping ethics in mind and purpose in mind as we're being mindful. And I think as well, for us in today's society, in our society, it's even more important to include all these three aspects, because we've got a lot of pressure and conditioning to be individualistic and competitive in our society. We get a lot of conditioning around that. And we can become disconnected from other people in the way we're living. So there is a near enemy to practicing mindfulness that we need to be aware of. If we practice present moment awareness, sati, without bringing in these other aspects of ethics and purpose, we can become very strongly concentrated. We can have a very strongly concentrated awareness, but it can be individualistic. And it can become what Sangha called alienated awareness. So we could be really strongly concentrated on our own experience, and that might feel quite insightful and it might feel pleasurable, but it might be limited to just ourselves, just myself. And a bodhisattva is practicing for the benefit of all beings. So a bodhisattva has ethical awareness and a sense of purpose as well. So in Triratna, this is really highlighted for us. So we emphasize ethics and we emphasize purpose. So we really have a strong practice of friendliness, community, connection, Sangha and friendship. And it's really important in terms of these aspects of mindfulness. And that's why we've got two main fundamental practices. So yes, we have the mindfulness of breathing, and also we have the development of metta, which brings in other people, and it brings in ethical sensitivity, and it brings in our ultimate purpose and where we're trying to go and how we want to develop. Okay, but of course, ultimately, for a very developed bodhisattva, these aspects would just be seamlessly one. Both wisdom and compassion, it would just be a seamless experience of ultimate reality, and it would naturally manifest as total compassion and love. But we are still teeny tiny baby bodhisattvas, aspiring teeny tiny babies. And we need to practice all these three aspects. We need to include ethical awareness and purpose, because we need to make sure that our mindfulness, as it grows, that it's developing in a loving and in a beneficial direction. We really need to guard against that, okay? So we've got the three aspects of mindfulness, and now we know all about them. So now we can just be mindful all the time, and before we know it, we'll just be proper bodhisattvas, and we'll be suffusing the world and all beings completely with compassion and wisdom. Let's just do that. Shall we do that? Well, we will. Yes, we will. We will do that. But how do we do it? It is a practice. It's a mind training, isn't it? And I know for myself that mindfulness can be challenging, and it takes effort and it takes practice. Okay, so for me, maybe some personal examples. You might recognize some of these things. So sati, present moment awareness. So when I'm tired and I really need to go to bed, when I stay up late and watch a series on Netflix, do I really, really want to be fully aware of my experience in that moment? Or am I trying to avoid that? People are nodding. I just don't quite somehow let myself notice what I'm doing. The next episode just comes up on its own when that little time bar goes, and I'm watching it, and another hour doesn't really matter. So yeah, maybe not. Maybe I've not got sati at that moment. And samprajanya, my future goals. So maybe I want to get a little bit fitter. Maybe I want a bit more energy, a bit more fitness, and I decide I'm going to just walk more, but then I just don't. Why? Somehow I just don't do it, okay? Or appamada ethics, I've really resolved to not speaking impatiently to my children, but somehow, when I'm in the kitchen cooking a meal and I'm in a rush and I'm tired, I might not be totally using total kind speech and loving speech in that moment. So what's that all about? I sort of know what I want to do. I sort of know about mindfulness, but haven't yet developed a strong and consistent mindfulness. So I sort of also don't quite always know about this stuff. Sometimes we just go along with our basic drives of craving and aversion and delusion. It seems easier. And I know that I sometimes think, just this time, it won't really matter. Just this time, the law of karma isn't true and it won't really make a difference. So it's sort of simple. Mindfulness is sort of simple and straightforward, but it's really demanding, and it's quite a subtle practice, and it is a practice. It does ask a lot of us, but it's really worth doing. It's really worth trying to cultivate. It's worth the effort. If you just bring to mind someone that you know who is deeply and consistently aware and mindful, what is it like to be around them? And do they have a positive effect on you and a positive effect on the world? What are they like? What effect do they have? So it really is worth the effort. Okay, so coming towards the end of the talk, what gets in our way? What does get in the way of developing mindfulness? And what helps us to do it? Well, first of all, one thing that always gets in the way, one thing that's always an enemy of mindfulness is papancha. Papancha, or I think sometimes it's prapancha. So this is thinking, but it's thinking of a particular kind. It's proliferative thinking, it's mental elaboration, it's thoughts that complicate and fabricate, thoughts that are just going on top of what's just actually happening. Papancha. So it's like when one thought leads to another, and then that leads to another in a train of thoughts, we're sort of going off on one in our heads. And sometimes we just go, oh, how did I get on to thinking about that? Where did that even come from? We could trace it back, actually. There's always a train, but we've usually forgotten it by then. Again, lots of nodding. That's papancha. We all do it, and the mind just does it. It seems to have a life of its own. And it is the enemy of mindfulness. It definitely is a problem for mindfulness, because when we're in papancha, when we're doing that, our mind is stuck on a superficial level of thought, of thinking. We're not really aware of what's actually happening. We're in a mind-made world. And this world it's made of concepts, it's made of ideas, made of narratives, made of opinions. It's a personally conditioned and fabricated world. It's not what's actually going on. So we're not simply seeing things as they actually are. And mindfulness, deep mindfulness, is about seeing things clearly as they actually are. Living in reality without that additional layer of self-referencing viewpoints. And again, Shantideva says about this, Shantideva says, it is just not possible to practice the Dharma without keeping a careful guard on the mind, which wanders so easily. The wandering mind is like an untamed elephant in rut, and it causes more havoc. Unless we watch it carefully, it will plunge us into hell. But if we tether the mind with the ropes of mindfulness, then we will be safe and happy. It's quite a statement. And just to say, thinking in itself, though, that's fine. Thinking is fine. Thinking and planning is fine, necessary, if we're doing it with mindfulness and direction and an ethical perspective. That's skillful thinking, clear thinking, kind thinking, effective thinking, but that's not papancha. Papancha's that other thing that's just going off doing its thing. Okay, so that's mindfulness. And papancha, the enemy of mindfulness, and it's so important for supporting the whole of our ethical practice, for the practice of this second paranita of the Bodhisattva path, ethics. So I'll end the talk, I'm just coming towards the end of the talk, and I'll end with a list of suggestions of things that help mindfulness, so things that we can do to cultivate and develop mindfulness in our everyday lives. So it's some particular approaches that we might find beneficial in our everyday life, in our really quite busy lives. And what you could do this coming week, if you want to, is you could choose something from this list that I'm going to go through to practice this week, and you could talk about that in your groups. You could say what it is that you've decided that you're going to practice this week. So just have that in mind as I go through the suggestions. So my first suggestion is, it's really about sati, is to set a reminder, maybe a timer, or maybe like an alert on your phone or on an alarm, to just remind you to be mindful. Maybe you could set that at random times throughout your day, or use something as a prompt that you do regularly. So maybe like every time the kettle is on, maybe every time you walk up the stairs or start the car, every time you walk through a doorway or something like that. Use that thing in itself as a prompt to be mindful. So that would be sati, remembering, recollecting. And you just would go, oh, I'll be mindful. And it can be really fascinating, actually, and really interesting to notice what your mind was doing at that moment throughout the day, at different times throughout the day. It can be really interesting. What was your mind doing when you bring yourself back to awareness? So that's one thing, maybe set a reminder and just bring awareness back. And another really great, everyday, very effective practice is to try and become aware of papancha, this proliferative, elaborating thinking, and develop mindfulness instead. So a really good way to counter papancha when we notice it is being mindful of the body. So directing awareness down from the thinking mind into the direct, immediate sensations in the body. So not thinking about the body, not thinking about sensations, actually feeling them. So awareness of the body in this way gets us out of papancha. And again, you could do it at regular prompts, like when the kettle's on, or set a timer. So the practice here is to bring the awareness down from the thinking mind and into the body. Maybe start with the face, because the face is near the head where we think the thoughts are happening. So it's sort of a bit easier to start there. So bringing the awareness out of the thinking mind and into the face and into the body. And what we're trying to do is notice sensations and stay interested in them. So really feeling what is actually happening in the body, the direct sensations, and staying interested, staying aware. And noticing when we drift or bounce back up into thought, into the thinking mind, and that starts up again, you're going, oh, well, I've got tummy ache because I'm annoyed because they said this and da. And then bringing it back into the body again, bringing the awareness back into the body. So you're not trying to change anything. The practice is just non-judgmental awareness, just awareness with kindness and patience, just noticing. So you're just noticing and just allowing whatever's happening. Okay, so that's mindfulness of the body to try to tackle papancha. That can be quite interesting. And another thing we could do, another practice, is to maybe regularly just recollect your purpose, sampajanya. Again, like with a timer or a prompt, a regular prompt. Or maybe even if you know there's an event coming up this week, maybe you could think when that event comes up, and it may be a challenging event, just reminding yourself, what are you trying to achieve? What is your skillful purpose in that event? Is what you're currently doing helping you achieve what you're trying to achieve? So that's another thing you could try, recollecting your purpose during the week. And ethical vigilance. So again, with the timer or a specific event, maybe again, an event that is coming up that might be challenging, you could really bring awareness to your ethics and go, are you acting skillfully? Is this in line with the precepts? Will this result in less suffering? And maybe like questioning, what is driving you? Does what you're doing have a sense of kindness? Does it have a sense of connection? So that's another one, ethical vigilance. And another quite practical, basic suggestion, but I think a really big one for us, is spending some time offline. So maybe being online less this coming week, we could maybe decide to do that. Because being online, it can be like living in just a massive big ball of papancha. It's just, we're surrounded by other people's opinions and views. It can be distracting, fast-paced, intoxicating, and unfocused. So some space for the poor old mind from all of that can just really allow the mind to settle and rest into a deeper level of awareness. So that's one suggestion, maybe spending more time offline. And a really lovely one, spending time in nature. Maybe going for a walk, maybe spending some time in one of the beautiful city parks that we've got. Really beneficial for mindfulness. This can just really allow the mind to settle and connect and expand in a different way. And of course, meditation, really fundamental. So another suggestion, because meditation directly cultivates mindfulness, directly. So maybe we could the suggestion is to alternate daily the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana. So maybe this week we could commit to doing that, or we could commit to meditating every day, or meditating for a little bit longer than we usually do, and maybe alternating the practices. Just see what happens, see how you feel after a week of that. And going on retreat, we've got 50 of our Sangha members on retreat at the moment, and if that's something that's available to you, maybe you could book a retreat, because that just gives the best conditions for mindfulness to just develop and to cultivate. And something that we can do that we're doing now, spending time in the Sangha, with our spiritual friends, because then we're putting ourselves in connection with ethical practice directly, and with positive attitudes, and people who are striving to be mindful, and people who are striving to have a sense of a higher purpose. So we're putting ourselves in those conditions. Okay, so those are all the ideas for practice for the coming week, and maybe you feel like you could take on and commit to something from that list. So that's the end of the talk, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and with mindfulness, strive on.